Why is the pH value in the aquarium actually important? Here in nature you can measure the pH value. Do we need to achieve precisely this value in the aquarium? The pH value is not like a temperature value. If we increase the temperature in the aquarium by 1 degree, it does not make a huge difference whether it is now 25 or 26 degrees. But the pH value is a logarithmic value. And logarithm means that one step on the scale makes a huge difference. If we reduce the pH value, for example, from 8 to 7, we have 10 times as much acid in the water. If we reduce it from 8 to 7 to 6, we have 100 times as much acid. And if we reduce the pH value to 5, we have 1,000 times as much acid. That is the logarithm. This is why it is important to know the pH value, especially if it fluctuates greatly, because this would put a huge strain on the animal organisms. The pH value fluctuates during the course of a day, in the aquarium just as it does in nature. Why is that? When light falls onto the water, onto the aquarium in the morning, the plants start to photosynthesize. They take CO2 and indirectly carbonic acid from the water. And if you take acid from the water and do not add any back, the pH value rises. This is why the value rises during the course of a day. It falls again overnight. This is the normal process. It is important that it does not fluctuate too greatly though. Slight fluctuations are not a problem, because as I have already explained, the pH value is a logarithmic value. However, if it fluctuates greatly, the animals have to cope with big changes in the acidic content of the water. From 8 to 7 to 6 means 100 times as much acid. The carbonate hardness, the KH, which stabilizes the pH value and keeps it in check, is responsible for this. Back to the pH value. The pH value fluctuates, and we should definitely measure by how much it fluctuates in the aquarium. My recommendation for you: check the pH value once in the morning before the light goes on, and once in the evening shortly before it goes off. If you notice that the pH value is 6 in the morning and 8 in the evening, you know that this is not optimal for your animals. In this case, we need to do something, and this is why we are talking about the carbonate hardness. You can add carbonate hardness to the water, and in doing so make the pH value more stable. Do we really need to manipulate the pH value? There is pH minus and pH plus. You can increase or reduce the pH value. Is that good? Is that important? Most fish that we have in the aquarium are relatively pH tolerant. They can cope if the pH value is 6.5, and even if it is 7.5. That doesn't really matter, but we have to get strong fluctuations under control through the carbonate hardness. The carbonate hardness should always be around 5, then the pH value is also fairly stable. If we now set a pH value of around 7, we have the ideal pH value for most aquariums. I say very cautiously for 90% of all aquariums. If it is 6.5 to 7.5, everything is fine, because the fish we keep are from tropical waters, from South America, Central Africa, Southeast Asia, or even from Australia. We often have pH values there that are slightly below neutral, that is to say below 7. At 6.5, everything is perfect. We know of fish that live with extreme pH values. These include the discus fish and the red neon tetra. We have caught red neon tetra in the Rio Negro. Here the pH value was 4.0. That was extreme. Hardly anything lives in this water, not even mosquito larvae. Only river dolphins, and that's it. And the red neon tetra lives here. This does not mean though that the red neon tetra could not cope with other pH values in the aquarium, but it tends to prefer acidic water, like the discus fish. Then there is the opposite. Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika cichlids. In Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika, the pH value is above 8. That is to say exactly the opposite. There are no acids here, but a lot of alkaline in the water, and this raises the pH value. In such extreme cases, we indeed need to raise or lower the pH value accordingly. For normal aquariums with a carbonate hardness of around 5, a fairly stable pH value around the neutral value is perfect. How can we adjust the pH value now? There are 3 options. The first option is to add an acid. pH minus is an acid. You can also walk to the car, fetch battery acid, and pour this into the aquarium. I don't necessarily recommend this, but the effect is actually the same. As soon as I add acid, the pH value goes down. If I do the opposite, if I add an alkaline, the pH value would go up. If you pour in chemicals to change the pH value, it will only stay up or down for a short period before it adjusts back again. This is not an elegant solution. A natural method would be to use peat. Using peat, you could also reduce the pH value slightly. Not greatly, but a little. Why? Because peat contains humic acid. Humic acid is another acid that would reduce the pH value. This second method is also not particularly elegant. The whole thing is soft and pulpy. The water is strongly colored, and it is not really controllable. How much should you use? Peat is, though, a semi-natural method, and is used by fish specialists for killifish and the like. The third option is actually the most elegant one. This is adding CO2. If I pipe CO2, the gas carbon dioxide, into the aquarium, part of this CO2 gas is used by the plant, and part of the CO2 reacts with the water to produce carbonic acid. And as soon as we have more acid, the pH value goes down. I can therefore say quite elegantly that I would like a pH value of, for example, 6.5, and add CO2 until this value is reached. I then turn off the CO2. You can do this using a magnetic valve or a control unit, and in this way I can adjust the pH to precisely the level I would like. There is, though, one thing to consider. Here is a table that shows clearly and nicely that I cannot endlessly reduce the pH value of hard water, because the CO2 I would need to get the pH value to, for example, 6.5 would kill the animals. I therefore need softer water. In softer water, I can reduce the pH value accordingly to 6.5, 6.0, or whatever. It all has to do with the hardness. So let's take another look at the table. CO2 is actually the most elegant method, but as I said, there are three solutions: peat, pH minus, a buffered acid if you buy it for aquaristics, and CO2.